America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It's the Monday edition of Point of View, and going to cover a lot of different topics, but let me just mention that we'll briefly mention a few issues in the area of the news, and then probably we'll get into more of that next hour. But we will focus some time and attention on a ministry that we've covered before called the Bucket Ministry. But for just a few minutes, let me do some comments about this, because next hour we will be talking about what is happening in Iran, and hundreds of demonstrators have been killed, and according to various human rights groups, that is over 500, although in just a minute there is at least one organization that has estimated that really since December 28th it could be in the thousands. But nevertheless, senior Western official has been briefed on that, said at least hundreds have been killed over the last few hours. Of course, the Trump administration is considering military action, and these deliberations are taking place right now between the president's top diplomatic, military, and defense advisors, and we'll see where that takes us in the future. There, of course, have been threats from the Iranian parliamentary speaker that if there were such strikes against them, that they would target U.S., Israel, international shipping. That may be a somewhat idle threat, because as we talked about on Friday, the Iranian rial, which is their currency, is worth virtually nothing. They have actually driven their country's economy into the ground, and so we'll certainly talk about that. We will also spend some time talking about what can we do. One thing I might mention is there is Iran Alive Ministries, which we've interviewed here before, which has really helped some of the besieged Christian communities in Iran, and certainly one of the very key issues. One of the fastest growing churches in the world is the Iranian church, which has, of course, been underground. There are also the need to see if we can fix some problems, because there has been Starlink, which has given the opportunity for individuals in Iran to communicate and have access to the internet. But it turns out that either and most likely China, but possibly Russia, have helped the Iranians be able to jam Starlink, and so we'll see what Elon Musk can do to overcome that. And that was a conversation that apparently Elon Musk will be having with Donald Trump in that regard. And a lot of this comes from the fact that the son of the last Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, actually the other day, Thursday and Friday, really called upon the Iranians to rally against the regime, and that was highly risk, because if there weren't responses to that, it would have shown how insignificant he was. But it does seem that we will be dealing quite a bit in the next hour with Iran. We'll cover some of that in more detail. Also going to be talking about what's going on up in Minnesota right now, and there's a lot to cover there. Supreme Court considering a case tomorrow having to do with girls' sports, and a couple of other issues that we will talk about. So lots to cover, and if we don't cover all of it today, we certainly will cover it this week as we are unfolding some of the things happening around the world. But I wanted you to once again know about this ministry called the Bucket Ministry. We've done some interviews in the past, but we bring to the microphone an individual that we're meeting for the first time. Matt Arnett serves as the community pastor and director of business on mission and church on the Bucket Ministry. The graduate of East Texas Baptist University, earned his MDiv from Fuller Theological Seminary, really works to identify the unique gifts on the Buck Ministries team. And so, Matt, welcome to Point of View.
Thank you so much, Kerby. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's, if we can, remind people about the Bucket Ministry, because we've talked about your boss, if you will, who founded this organization when he was in Brazil. You just come back from a trip to Kenya, and you've been there many times before. But what is the Bucket Ministry, and how did it get started?
Yes, absolutely. So the Bucket Ministry is a global water ministry. Our mission is to share God's love through the gift of clean, safe drinking water. So we believe that everybody deserves the opportunity to drink clean water. And even more than that, we believe that everybody deserves the opportunity to know Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. And so we use clean water as a tool to get the opportunity to build relationships and share the gospel. The thing that is unique about the Bucket Ministry and what's in the name is we use a filter that connects to a 5-gallon bucket that is incredibly sustainable, it's long-lasting, it's relatively inexpensive, and it works incredibly. And so our model is to distribute bucket filters to every household in a community. Every family receives a filter. These filters, like I said, are incredibly sustainable. So they've been field tested past 1 million gallons. So for a family with 10 people in it, that is more than 20 years worth of clean water. There's no replacement parts. There's nothing that they have to change. They just flush it with clean water, and this filter will serve them for an incredibly long time. And like I said, with that, we get the opportunity to share the good news of Jesus and their need for the living water.
Let's again maybe talk about how Chris got it started, because he was really just trying to follow and support his, was it daughter? I think
That's
it was,
right.
yeah. And they were on that boat, and I've seen that before at Prestonwood. We've had many people on that boat going up the Amazon, and all of a sudden he's just kind of a business person thinking, what in the world? I mean, it's not like he came with this great vision of global water supplies, but he's going up there and looking at the water that individuals up and down the Amazon are drinking, and knowing that children are getting sick, children and adults are dying, and he says, there's something we can do about this, right?
That's right. And so Chris is on the boat, and again, like you said, there to support his daughter, and he's exposed face to face with the world water crisis through the offer of a drink of water in a cup that when he looked over at his interpreter wagged his finger like, no, you better not drink this. And through that, really heard a word from the Lord. 2 words actually helped them.
Yeah.
And so in that, Chris, being a guy in the business world, really felt the call of God to do something about this global water crisis. According to the World Health Organization, there's 785 million people in the world that lack regular access to clean water. And so in a way, the Bucket Ministry steps into that space, getting the opportunity to give the gift of clean water, and again, share the gift of the living water through Jesus.
I love to use his illustration, because here's a person in business, has no real desire necessarily to be ministry, but of course supports ministry, and all of a sudden finds himself in ministry. And I think I want to come back and talk about some other aspects of this, obviously, but one of the things that is a great lesson for our listeners is there may be a ministry for you, and you may just be saying, look, I would rather just stay in the business world. I'd rather just have this job, and I'll support the people doing ministry. And yet here is a good example of an individual that ended up there. And as I come back, I want to talk about your own story, because in some respects you heard about this because you've been a pastor at a church just down the road from us. And nevertheless, having lived in Rockwall, you began to see how you could be involved in with that as well. So there are opportunities even in this ministry. If you're a businessman, if you're a pastor, just a layperson, I think there's some great opportunities. And if you go to the website, pointofview.net, you can see that it will naturally link you to thebucketministry.org. You can either type that in, or you can find it right there and find out some more. We're going to continue talking about this ministry, even how you can be involved, right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
As 2025 was winding down, one of the biggest stories was the fraud scandal in Minnesota. First with the investigative piece by Ryan Thorpe and Christopher Rufo. Then there were several stories, including the YouTube videos by Nick Shirley, who discovered that most of the child care centers had no children, and one even misspelled the word learning. Soon, outraged taxpayers produced videos complaining that their hard-earned taxes were being spent on fraud, as well as on military actions and questionable government expenditures. Why pay taxes, they argued, if my tax dollars are being misspent? The outrage continued from both sides of the political spectrum. Batya Ungar-Sargon has become more critical of her fellow liberals. In her program on News Nation, she noted this irony. You are wondering whether you can afford to have another child because childcare is so expensive. Meanwhile, a group of Somalis in Minnesota got $110 million for childcare centers that don't exist. Carl Higbee is a Newsmax reporter and commentator. He notes that real Americans are so fed up with this type of fraud by Somalis because we feel that there's no mechanism for you or me to stop it. We watched the Pentagon fail like 8 audits in a row, $300 billion to Ukraine, and no receipts for that. His solution was for the president to pardon American citizens from paying their federal taxes in 2026 until Congress is serious about cutting waste and fraud. Now, this won't happen, but these few examples, and many others, illustrate the level of anger voters are feeling about these latest stories of fraud. It is likely that the anger will be felt at the ballot box in both the primary elections and the general election in November. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Matt Arnett with us as we are talking about the Bucket Ministry. If you'd like to know a little bit more, we have a link on our website, or you can go directly there, and we'll get into some of the ways in which you can participate and be involved. Next hour, we'll get into everything from the Iranian protest, the whole issue of the Minnesota shooting that was taking place, the Minneapolis shooting, the ICE Watch issues, and a variety of other topics, which we will get into, including a very important Supreme Court case that will be heard tomorrow. But let's, if we can, come back to the Bucket Ministry. And Matt, I thought it'd be good. I talked a little bit about how Chris founded the organization. Here you've been a pastor in a church right down the road from where we're broadcasting right now, and yet here you are in the Bucket Ministry. How'd that happen?
That's a great question. Thank you, Kerby. I never saw myself working in a parachurch organization. As you mentioned, I went to school and received an MDiv and always thought I would be part of the local church here in the United States. And that was my heart. That was what I thought. And then about 5-6 years ago, my God just redirected all of that. I was serving at a church, and I had the privilege of working with some amazing volunteers. And as I was getting to know some of these volunteers, I kept hearing of this ministry that they were part of, this water ministry where they were going down the Amazon River and they were taking clean water to people. But the thing that really stuck out to me through all of this was the tool that they were using, this filter that removed all the broken things in the water and gave hope, gave health, gave clean water. But then it didn't stop there. They would share the gospel through this tool. And I've been in ministry for a number of years. I've seen some amazing evangelism tools, seen God work through those. And yet there was something about this meeting of a physical need that transformed their physical reality and yet pointed to a deeper need that they had, that there's this brokenness inside of us, this harmful thing that's separating us, that's killing us. And the hope for that is a Savior that will take that brokenness on himself. And so as I heard about this, I got connected with this ministry and really got the opportunity to jump in and serve in a capacity where working with people that have come from the business world that are incredible business minds and entrepreneurial and great at developing systems. And I've gotten to come in and be able to speak into the spiritual side and make sure that as we serve more people, as the ministry grows, we're also taking seriously what it looks like to not only evangelize, but make disciples in the places that we serve.
But a great evangelistic opportunity, though, because clean water, brokenness or sin, or however you want to illustrate that, to clean water. And again, it's such a physical and very important solution. And I think it connects only so well. So you just come back from Kenya, and I remember when we were talking with Chris last time, he was talking about this outreach, and I think it illustrates the point. I think right now most people think, oh yeah, well, you go out there in the bush, you go out there in the rural areas, and maybe they're collecting water from maybe water that was left over from the last rain, and it's been stepped in, and maybe it's even near where cattle have grazed, and you don't even know how it is. But he was talking about going through some of the urban slums in Nairobi, Kenya. And so in some respects, of course, I shared with you off air, just a good friend that's been a missionary in Kenya all these years. But you've got to think of Nairobi as a modern city. But that's where you've been handing out a lot of those filters, right?
That's exactly right. Yes. And so, again, like you said, many people, whenever you think about the water crisis, you think about places that don't have technology, don't have access, and yet the majority of the people in the world that have water insecurity are living in urban areas.
Yeah.
And so specifically in the slums that we get the privilege to serve in and around Nairobi, including the one that we just celebrated the completion of in December, these are people that are surrounded by technology. They're surrounded by cities and things like that. And yet because of the lack of development and the corruption within governments, they find themselves in a situation where they don't have access to public services. They don't have access to clean water, sewer. We completed a work in one of the slums in Nairobi. There's 408,000 people who live there, and there are 76 toilets. And so if you let that sink in for a minute, the pollution of their water sources is unfathomable. And so there's an incredible need. And again, the transformation that happens whenever a family receives a filter that can take care of that need and meet them in that, so that they're no longer struggling with the diseases and things that come from lack of clean water.
Let's say we can just talk about that for a minute, because how is it that these slums develop? Is there obviously there's corruption. It seems to me there's also persecution and some other things that they've dealt with. Can you speak to that?
Sure. So specifically in Kenya, much of the development of the slums came out of, if you think about people trying to look for a better dream, a better hope. Many people from rural areas moving into the city for hope. We see that across the United States, other places across the world. And so they come with hope of an opportunity. And as often happens, the opportunities were maybe overdrawn. And so they end up in these places where they can live incredibly cheaply. And then to your point with corruption, oftentimes the government will use these masses of people in a really vulnerable situation in order to push political agendas and things like that. And so they become the victims not only of physical issues, but that just continues to snowball as it grows there in those urban slums.
How can people get involved? Because here's a good example of, first of all, a businessman that started the ministry, a pastor who came into the ministry, and so it's certainly an opportunity for people to participate with you in a variety of different ways. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. The biggest way that we ask for people to come and join us is through prayer.
Yes.
We know that none of this happens without God at work, and we have seen that time and time again, how God has moved tremendously through the faithful prayers of faithful people all around the globe. We also understand, just like any other nonprofit ministry, that we work through other people's money, and so the generosity of people giving to this work and sharing. On average right now in the places that we serve, a $56 gift will give a family generational access to clean water. So you think about a child growing up with clean water, a family being able to raise their kids, allow their kids to go to school with clean water. It's about $56 for a family to receive a bucket, a water filter, a Bible in their language. And then we do follow-ups with every family. So we do 3 in-person follow-ups with every single family to make sure that the water filter is working, that their health is improving, and continue to invest in their spiritual development, getting them connected to local churches. We also have opportunities to go and to go on into the field, go on a trip and see that work yourself. And then we also, finally, the fourth way is we have a storytelling program. So for people that have a want to tell somebody, want to share about this opportunity, you can join our group of storytellers that go out and share about this ministry and invite people to be part of it.
We do have a link to it, and in just a few minutes we'll talk about all the different connection points to it. But let me just mention, as we're coming to a break, that we always have an action item, and our action item today has to do with the FACE Act Repeal Act of 2025. Now you say, okay, what is that? Well, FACE was passed many years ago. It's called the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances, and it was something that prohibits physical force or threat to physical force or a number of others, and a lot of it had to do with abortion clinics. The problem is it's been used in a number of ways, and of course you've had pro-life sidewalk counselors being sent to jail, parents and others terrorized by federal raids. We even saw that under the Biden administration. And so there has been a desire to finally address this issue, and so this is an opportunity for you to contact your representative on this particular issue. And so if you are a pro-life individual, and I hope that you are, and you are concerned about this particular piece of legislation that's been around for some time, this is an attempt to actually let your representative know that you would encourage him or her to support that. We have a couple of very important issues that we've posted here. We have a suggested message, so you can modify it any way you might want to. You put in your contact information. That will then surface, of course, if you know your address, and I'm sure you do, who your representative is, if you don't happen to know that. And then you can go through at the end and either send it, or you can print it out and put it in the mail, or you can even push the button preview to look at it one more time before you send it. But that is our action item today. It's a very good pro-life initiative. It is one that we think has a chance of passing at least the House of Representatives. And so that's why we're encouraging you right now to contact your representative. So go to the website, pointofview.net. You'll find out more about the Bucket Ministry and about our action item. We'll be right back.
Have you ever met a child you knew would do great things? They displayed remarkable imagination, understanding, and a zest for learning. Now imagine someone takes that child and instead of fostering their potential with a real education, they feed them nothing but lies. You know, that scenario isn't so far from reality. From a young age, Americans are fed a consistent stream of distorted facts, from the secular indoctrination they receive in many public schools, to the biases presented as fact in many colleges and universities, to the barrage of misinformation from the mainstream media and the lack of moral grounding in our society. It's not that Americans aren't capable of understanding the truth, it's that they aren't exposed to it enough. You can expose more Americans to the truth when you give to Point of View, where listeners receive facts, perspective, and biblical truth they don't get from society. As long as we have truth, we have hope. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, let me mention that we do have a link to thebucketministry.org. Matt Arnett in studio with us for a little bit longer, but let me just mention that as you go there, you will see that it says our mission is to bring hope and life to communities around the world facing water scarcity and spiritual hardship. We provide clean, safe drinking water and share the living water in places with limited access to both. And I think there are just some great opportunities, because as you try to explain on the website here, Matt, Population, United States, 340 million. The people affected by world water crisis, 785 million, twice as much. And over 1 billion people have never heard the good news of Jesus Christ. So whether it's saving people physically or saving people spiritually, that's exactly what you're about, isn't it?
That's absolutely right. Yes, and that's something that really has been a huge piece of the heart of this ministry over the last few years. As we, like I said, I came from a church background where I believed, we have this mandate to share the gospel, to go and tell, and to make disciples. Yes. Even. And this physical aspect of the ministry was something that I think sometimes in the church world we might disconnect from, or we don't understand how these actually work in unison. And so that's been something that I used to see, that we did 3 things: that we gave people clean water, that we preached the gospel, and that we made disciples. But really, more and more, I realized that we do one thing, that the faithful work of discipleship is meeting the needs of these people that are in desperate need, that we proclaim the gospel of Jesus, that we get people connected to local churches and allow them to thrive in that community. And so getting to participate that is really amazing, and getting to see churches in the communities that we serve really take root and grow, because at the end of the day, it's not about the bucket ministry being in Kenya for the next 100 years. We really believe that God is calling his local church to serve their local community. And so we get to, as a parachurch organization, we get to truly come alongside the church and be part of that work.
Well, it kind of reminds me of the question I've received every once in a while. Well, do we meet the physical needs or do we meet the spiritual needs? And I always say yes, because there's no disconnect between those. I mean, you can think about missions even centuries ago recognized that you had to feed hungry stomachs before you could feed hungry hearts. And there is a sense in which, as you said, you don't have to disconnect all of this. In some respects, giving somebody a cup of cold water, to use a biblical phrase, is also providing an opportunity to minister to their physical and spiritual needs. And no better illustration than giving clean water. Now, as I look at your bucket ministry, and again, I encourage people to go to thebucketministry.org, you've got some pretty interesting statistics on how many of these filters have been distributed, how you've been discipling, and all the rest. And if nothing else, it does seem to me that this is an illustration of the fact that this is making quite an impact. And I see in front of you got a couple of percentages and numbers here that we might want to talk about for a minute.
Sure. So we care a lot about the numbers, as you can imagine. We talked earlier about Chris came from the business world, where if it's not measured, it didn't happen.
Yes.
And so thinking about that from a ministry standpoint, the good thing is that we're not chasing after trying to bring revenue. Like, we're getting the opportunity to see souls transformed. Mm-hmm. And so whenever we look at metrics, we care about the numbers because people matter.
Right.
The people that we serve are not data points. They're not dots on a map. They are souls. They're people that are made in the image of God, that have dignity. And that, like I said, they deserve the opportunity not only to have clean water, but to experience living water. And so we have a pretty robust follow-up program system that we use to make sure that whenever we serve a community, we go in and we know where every single house is. We know every family in every single house. We're tracking every follow-up visit that we do, the engagement that we have, the amount of time spent there, the decisions made. And again, we do all of that because of the heart behind getting to serve people. And so, like we mentioned in December, we were celebrating the completion of our Athi River project, which Athi River is a town about 20 miles south of Nairobi, Kenya. And over the last 40 months, we have had the opportunity to serve 13,161 families with clean water filters. Through that process, we have gone into every single home. Like I said, we've done over 40,000 follow-up visits with these families, and we've had the opportunity to proclaim the gospel. We've seen 2,400 people come to faith in the last
amazing.
40 months.
Yeah.
We have baptized just over 400 people now, and one of the things that I'm incredibly excited about is that we have seen over 20 churches planted in this area, these house churches where, again, people are gathering together, they're studying the Bible together, they're praying for each other, encouraging each other. And as much as the water makes a difference in people's lives, the testimony that we see is that that coming to faith in Christ and then being in Christian community is really the transformational component that redirects everything about their future.
This we can talk about how people can be involved, because I've watched individuals who say, look, I have never led anybody to the Lord. I've hardly ever had a chance to even proclaim the gospel. And you can go on some of these short-term missions trips, including things that they could do through the bucket ministry. And for the first time, they come back wired. They come back refreshed. They come back renewed, whatever phrase you want to use. And that, I think, is an illustration of some opportunities for people to partner with you. Can you talk about that?
That's right, Kerby. You're absolutely right. And one of the there's no better way to get excited about sharing your faith than to see it in action, to see the transformation of God at work in a place. And whenever you go on one of these trips, that's one thing that you are guaranteed to see is God transforming a community and bringing light into a dark place. And I think for so many of us, and I fell into this category as well, even whenever I was in Bible school, whenever I was in seminary, where I would get into a situation where I was supposed to share my faith, and I had this fear that what if I say the wrong thing? What if I don't have all the answers? What if I don't know the thing that they ask me? And the thing that is so important for, I think, all of us to recognize and hear is that God has called us to go and tell, to share testimony. And so
share
often,
your own testimony, yeah.
Absolutely. So often in these moments, the people that you're talking to, that you're sharing with, they're not needing you to be the greatest theologian or biblical scholar. They're struggling with the same things that you are. And so if you can just begin with, something as simple as, hey, there was a time in my life where I was struggling with fear, anxiety, where I didn't believe that my life mattered, or I didn't have any hope. And then I was introduced to Jesus. And now I've felt the abundance of life here on earth and the hope for a future. It changes everything about who we are, and it takes the burden off of us. The thing that I tell people all the time is the good news for you is that you don't save people. Mm-hmm. God's the one that saves people. It's our call to be faithful. And so for some of us, maybe for some of the people listening here, that's signing up for a trip and going somewhere that's outside of your culture, outside of your context, and just being faithful to what God might have for you.
And again, I oftentimes say to individuals, have you ever been in a Bible study? Yes. Have you ever been going to church? Yes. Okay, you're better prepared than most of the people you're going to be talking to, especially in some of these third world countries. I do need to take a break. When we come back, I thought a couple of other things we might focus on. We've, of course, been talking about Kenya, and a little bit about Brazil, but I thought we'd talk about all the different places where you are ministering, because some people might say, well, are there some other places where you go? And the answer to that is yes. As you go to the website, though, let me mention a couple of things. It is called thebucketministry.org. You might say, you've been talking about these filters. What are you talking about? Well, you can actually see what it looks like, and there's a picture there. If some of those facts and figures are really interesting to you, that would be certainly something that you can learn about. Let me give you an assignment, and that is you probably know a missions pastor in your church. Matter of fact, you may be a missions pastor listening right now. You can go there, and you can see that they really describe what they're doing. We identify communities around the world, and then we conduct door-to-door assessments. We distribute, of course, the water filters, and then we follow up with each family at least 3 times. And, of course, you've heard the stories about individuals that have accepted the Lord, been baptized, and all the rest. And maybe we can even share a story or two, but what you can do is actually go to the website. There is information about them, about how to get involved, some of their campaigns, their kids club, which we'll talk about in just a minute, as well as some other great resources. So again, that's why we wanted to highlight this ministry as we come into 2026, the Bucket Ministry. We've talked about it before with Chris. Now we talk about it today with Matt, and we encourage you to find out more. Let's take a break. We'll come back and talk a little bit more about the reach of this organization and how you can begin to get involved. All that coming up right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Matt Arnett with us, and next hour we're going to get into some very important issues taking place around the world and even here in this country. But Matt, for just a minute, since we're talking about the Bucket Ministry, talk about some of the places where the outreach has been taking place. We focused a lot of time and attention on this celebration of what has happened in Kenya, but there are other places where you've had this ministry as well.
Absolutely. As you have mentioned, the ministry really began in Brazil. And so we do a lot of work across Latin America, Central America, and have now started doing some work in Mexico as well. Mm-hmm. We are completed a project in Ciudad Victoria, Mexico, and are now beginning a brand new opportunity just across the Texas border in Juarez.
Wow.
We also, like I mentioned earlier, are working all across the continent of Africa, from Sierra Leone, mm-hmm. Uganda, Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya. We are working in South Sudan, all across Africa, really. In Asia, we're in the Philippines. We're doing some work in India. And always continuing to partner, even beyond projects that we run entirely. We come alongside and partner with organizations that are doing gospel work all around the world, and where a water filter could be a good entry strategy for them.
I said just a minute ago that you might want to contact your missions pastor, and that's a good example. You may already know of a ministry that your church has in one of those countries, and they may or may not even know about the Bucket Ministry, so there's a way that you can connect up. And again, we have a link so that you could pass that on to an individual that's in church leadership. But if you're a church leader, maybe just like Matt, a pastor, maybe you should think about what you might do. Just in passing, I wanted to also mention the Kids Club, because that's just something I mentioned real quickly, because that's a way in which you can engage children at a younger age in global missions, and that's something that you've been doing as well, right?
That's absolutely right. And one of the things that I love about Kids Club has two faces in the Bucket Ministry. We have our international component as well as our domestic, our local outreach. And so the start of Kids Club happened whenever we started asking families and residents how we could better serve them. And the thing that they universally came back with was invest in our kids. And so we started programs that taught gospel lessons, did different educational opportunities for kids, but also taught them how to clean their filters, how to take care of it, how to sanitation and hygiene, things like that in their local villages. But on the United States side, one of the ways that we get the opportunity to come alongside and partner with local churches, and we say partner because we really see it that way. We're not looking just for donors or for people to give to this ministry. We truly want partnership. We're looking for a handshake, not just a handout. And so we come alongside children's ministries that are looking maybe to engage in global missions and to teach about their students maybe through a vacation Bible school program or summer ministry. And this gives the kids an opportunity to understand and see ministry around the world, but it also gives churches a way to share the gospel in a fresh way with their kids in their church. And so using a bucket filter as a way to share the gospel with their kiddos. And the beautiful thing, because of the two components of this, we get the opportunity to connect churches all around the world with each other and kids all around with each other through the technology that we have. And so we can do that through our programming. And
the impact that it has on children is pretty significant. In the old days, they used to say a young child that's complaining about not getting a pair of Air Jordans all of a sudden begins to change his or her attitude a little bit when they realize that they have had a chance to either pray for or even visit a country where nobody has anything on their feet at all. And so there's a sense in which the same thing, if you are so, and I think Americans for sure take for granted that you go to the faucet and turn it on, there's always water, it's always clean, it's always safe. When they begin to see what's happening in other parts of the world, it really kind of changes their attitude for the better, I think.
That's absolutely right. In fact, last summer I was at a church and as I had gotten done presenting, this beautiful young 8-year-old girl walked up to me and she handed me a $100 bill. And I was like, oh, wow, there's a story behind this. So tell me, and she said, well, my birthday was last weekend and my grandma gave me $100. But she said, I want you to do something with this that is worthwhile. And so she got to hear about this work, and she said, I can take this $100 and I can give 2 families clean water. There will be kids like me that grew up with clean water because of this $100.
Great.
And her grandma was with her, and she was, as you can imagine, she was just weeping to see the transformation in this child. But that's the thing that I think is such a beautiful part of really engaging in God's work in any place, is that oftentimes we're the ones that are blessed far more than the ones that we're serving.
Well said. Let me just real quickly, since we're almost out of time in this hour, to mention again, it's thebucketministry.org. People will land there. We're encouraging people to go there even during the break, and certainly if they have a chance somewhere along the way. There are a number of buttons to push, but talk about, again, if somebody says, well, I'd like to give to you, or I'd maybe like to see what we can do to partner with you. Who do I talk to? Which buttons do I push? How do I get involved? Can you
Absolutely.
help us out?
If you go to our website, the Give button is right there and really easy. You can make a one-time gift. You can also sign up to give recurring if you want to continue to bless people every month, and that's incredibly helpful. If you go and look at the different campaigns in that section of the website, the different places that we're working, if there's a specific place that is incredibly meaningful to you, you can give directly to that. And if you do give specifically to a place, then 100% of that gift will go to that location and to the people that live right there. And so that is the easiest way to do that. You can also either contact through the website, or if you email us, and the easiest way is just info at thebucketministry.org. If you have any questions or want to get more involved, we will get back to you really quickly and help get you connected any way that we can.
Let me again mention that that's in campaigns, and I thought I'd just mention it. You can see Kenya, Mexico, India, Nigeria, as well as Ghana, Uganda, as well as South Africa, Sierra Leone, the Philippines, which again, we have Mexico, Kenya, Brazil, just a few off the top of my head, and just as an illustration again of where you can connect up. And so first of all, I would hope that you would connect up with them. And Matt, good to connect up with you. First of all, say hi to Chris and everybody else there at the Bucket Ministry. We've talked with them before, but we've had a chance to meet you face to face, and I appreciate you driving down and being in studio with us today.
Thank you, Kerby. It's such a blessing, and thank you so much for the ministry and the work that you do. You're making a huge difference in this world. We're
going to take a break, and when we come back, guess what? Iran. We're going to talk about the Iranian protesters. What is the president going to do? We will also talk a little bit more about behind the scenes. We've learned more about what's called Ice Watch, the protests that have been taking place. A little bit of information by Byron York with the Washington Examiner about the shooting in Minnesota. I also do want to spend a little bit of time, if we have time today. If not, we'll do it tomorrow, because the Supreme Court considering 2 cases having to do with men and women's sports. We've talked about this before, the whole transgender issue. And then we'll wind down with a piece on, are we seeing a revival among Gen Z, a topic we've addressed here as well. And if we don't get to all of that, we will postpone some of it till tomorrow, but we'll see how far we can get. Sometimes this host gets a little bit long-winded. We'll see what we can do to finish that off. And don't forget, we do have an action alert. I mentioned it before. I'll go into it in more detail in the second hour. But if you didn't have a chance to check it out, go to the website, pointofview.net. In the middle column there, the FACE Act, Repeal Act of 2025. We'll talk more about that next hour. And, of course, my Viewpoints commentary today about the fraud scandal in Minnesota. Lot to cover. We'll be back with more right after this.
Many years ago, they began saying that we live in the information age. Well, today there is so much information coming at us from every direction. The hardest thing is to discern which issues are really important and how can I make a positive impact without wasting my time trying to figure out accurate information. Let me give you a suggestion to help with that. Visit pointofview.net. Look at the tabs across the top. Find the one named Viewpoints. Kerby Anderson and others on our team are constantly watching for news to identify those issues that you really need to know about. They boil things down in a brief summary, and then you can decide if it's something on which you want to learn more and get involved. Again, when you go to pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints, you'll see exactly what I mean. You'll see the issues that we are covering right now. And when you like what you see, I honestly think you will, you can slide on over, enter your email, and get them automatically sent to your inbox each day. That's it. Take a minute now, be informed. Pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints. Point of View will continue after this.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if we can get into a couple of very important issues, and a little bit later we'll open up the phones if you'd like to make a comment. If not, certainly we have posted quite a number of articles that you might want to read. If nothing else, a prayer target. I'm just thinking that, of course, we have our Pray for America, but maybe at least one time we could also have a Pray for Iran, pray for many of the Christians in Iran. So I'll get into some of that. I've posted one article, but I'm going to be quoting from a couple of others to talk about Iran. Then we will talk about the protest style of ICE Watch. That is something we've learned a little bit more about in terms of course, the killing of Renee Nicole Good, and we'll get into that. Dan McLaughlin has a very good piece. The problem isn't ICE, it's ICE Watch. Also, one on the Minneapolis shooting. And, of course, my commentary today has to do with Minnesota, because we're talking about the Minnesota fraud. Ran into somebody this morning asking about Minnesota, and I started talking about the fraud, and then realized, no, they wanted to talk about the shooting. Well, we'll get into those as well. And that might cover quite a bit of time, but I did want to leave a little bit of time near the end to highlight a very important case before the Supreme Court having to do with girls' sports, which we'll be hearing oral arguments for tomorrow. And then, of course, the whole issue that we've been talking about for some time. Are we on the edge of revival? What's happening with Gen Z? I think this very good piece that appeared in Christian Post says, okay, let's not get over our skis. We have some encouraging signs, but they aren't that encouraging yet. So let's just hold back before we declare that this is the third great awakening of America. Okay, with that as background, let's spend some time, as we will probably all week, talking about what is happening in Iran. The article I've posted here comes from the Washington Post. Hundreds of demonstrators have been killed in Iran, rights groups said on Sunday, as reports of dramatic escalation in the use of deadly force by security forces began to break through the communications blackout. As you heard me say just a minute ago, there has been two things that have been very helpful to people. Number one, the State Department provided free virtual private network. That's a technology that allows the Iranians to have some ability to circumvent the Iranian regime's censorship efforts. And then, of course, you've had Starlink, but Starlink kits have been banned in Iran. If you have a kit, a Starlink kit, you can be put in prison for up to 2 years, certainly 6 months to 2 years. And so the device has been smuggled in. Well, now the Iranians have figured out a way to really jam Starlink. So there may be some solutions to that, which we will talk about perhaps as the week unfolds. But the Center for Human Rights in Iran estimates that about 500 protesters have been killed. But to be fair, I tried to look at multiple sources. There is the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran. I know virtually nothing about them, but their estimate is that there have been about 3,000 people that have been killed since December 28th. So whatever number you want, it's a genocide that is beginning to unfold and something very concerning. Okay, what can the administration do? What can we do? Well, we can start talking about that. First, the Trump administration is considering military options. We've already talked about that. The president's gathered together some of the top diplomatic, military, and defense advisors discussing a broad range and array of options. Some are military, some are non-military. And, of course, this is something that has been put together. Our friends at the Wall Street Journal have really summarized some of that, although the article I'm reading from right now comes from the Washington Post. Of course, as you might imagine, the Iranian parliamentary speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, actually has said that if there were strikes against Iran, they would target U.S., Israel, and international shipping lanes. Maybe they would. We'll see. And, of course, the internet blackout has been a concern, and as a result has made it more difficult to get accurate numbers. But the Center for Human Rights in Iran says the massacre is unfolding. The world must act now to prevent further loss of life. Of course, if the president does, then he'll be criticized for intervening in a country. But I remember the criticism that we've had and others had of Barack Obama when we had the so-called Spring Revolution that provided what could have been an opportunity to overthrow the theocracy there in Iran, and we as a country did nothing. So the president will be criticized if he doesn't do anything. The president will be criticized if he does something. We understand that. The context is really significant because the Iranian mullahs literally run the country's economy into the ground. The currency, the rial, is crashing. And as a result, it has been a disaster for not only the Iranian people, but it, I think, suggests the end, or at least the beginning of the end, of a regime that has been in power since 1979, or even if you want to count when that first uprising was taking place, that is certainly the case. And so there are opportunities for ministry. We'll see if we can maybe surface some. One that was mentioned was Iran Alive Ministries, which has oftentimes taken some of the material we have and actually translated into Farsi. And they are having an outreach to some of these Christian communities. We can talk about a few others in the next couple of days, and so that is the case. But again, you might be wondering, well, where did some of this come from? Well, there was enough turmoil on the ground, but the Iranian opposition leader and the son of the last Shah of Iran, that's Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Reza Pahlavi actually held a press conference many months ago on this whole idea of having a reaction, and then once again took to rallying the Iranians last Thursday and Friday. And I like what the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal said. If few had showed, then it would have shown that he would be just another big talker who is safely abroad. But instead, the Iranian people have answered the call, and you have seen police vehicles that were abandoned and set ablaze, regime flags ripped up, several state buildings were burned in Tehran, Iran, and others. And again, there is a real concern right now as to what would be the next next step, first by the Ayatollah Khamenei, and also this next step by President Donald Trump. So we'll keep watching this for some time, but it is something that I don't believe will be a one-day story. I suspect we'll be talking about it all week and even focusing on some of it on our Friday weekend edition. Talked about it on Friday, but it's gone from bad to worse. We see if this leads to a regime change, to a military response, and I haven't even checked the news to see if there's already been a military response. I wouldn't be surprised if fairly soon, just as we learned last Monday of the capture of Nicolas Maduro, there might be some other actions in the works as well with President Donald Trump and the U.S. military. Not to mention all the things Israel might be involved with. So we'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
As 2025 was winding down, one of the biggest stories was the fraud scandal in Minnesota. First with the investigative piece by Ryan Thorpe and Christopher Rufo. Then there were several stories, including the YouTube videos by Nick Shirley, who discovered that most of the child care centers had no children, and one even misspelled the word learning. Soon, outraged taxpayers produced videos complaining that their hard-earned taxes were being spent on fraud, as well as on military actions and questionable government expenditures. Why pay taxes, they argued, if my tax dollars are being misspent? The outrage continued from both sides of the political spectrum. Batya Unger-Sargon has become more critical of her fellow liberals. In her program on News Nation, she noted this irony. You are wondering whether you can afford to have another child because child care is so expensive. Meanwhile, a group of Somalis in Minnesota got $110 million for child care centers that don't exist. Carl Higbee is a Newsmax reporter and commentator. He notes that real Americans are so fed up with this type of fraud by Somalis because we feel that there's no mechanism for you or me to stop it. We watched the Pentagon fail like 8 audits in a row, $300 billion to Ukraine and no receipts for that. His solution was for the president to pardon American citizens from paying their federal taxes in 2026 until Congress is serious about cutting waste and fraud. Now, this won't happen, but these few examples, and many others, illustrate the level of anger voters are feeling about these latest stories of fraud. It is likely that the anger will be felt at the ballot box in both the primary elections and the general election in November. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Critical Race Theory, go to viewpoints.info/CRT. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just mention that tomorrow we are going to once again get into some of these issues, although I did want to, just as we did today, start the first hour by actually celebrating something that probably won't get much coverage, but should in a lot of churches, and that is the 500th anniversary of what's called William Tyndale's New Testament. We take for granted today that we can read the Bible in our language, but that wasn't always the case, and I think we will spend some time talking with our friend Leland Ryken, as well as Edward Andrews, both of whom have been on the program with us before, about this new book that celebrates that. And, of course, a while back we celebrated the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation with Martin Luther, and we'll get into this with William Tyndale. And along the way, every once in a while, it's good to do a little bit of the celebration. There's so many issues happening, but let's not lose fact of, as Christians, some of the benefits that we enjoy today because of the Bible translations that have taken place, because of the desire to actually create functioning republics where we have freedom. And, of course, as we look at what is happening in Iran right now, it's a reminder that we should every day be grateful for the freedom that we have. But a minute ago, we were talking about very deadly protests. Let's talk about the protest here in this country. We did, of course, have the very unfortunate and tragic death of Renee Nicole Good. But Dan McLaughlin really wants to help people understand where some of this comes from. And interestingly enough, I've run into a few people that said, I don't think she was acting on her own. I think she was part of a protest organization. And the answer is yes. And if you haven't seen that adequately covered by the legacy media, no surprise there. That's why this article, it is our second article by Dan McLaughlin, says the problem isn't ICE, it's ICE Watch. Let's talk about that. The real goal of ICE Watch is the complete removal of federal immigration enforcement from particular jurisdictions, and right now that's been Portland and Minneapolis, thus ensuring the end, really, of deportation of people that are here illegally. The argument, he says, is that the confrontation that led to Miss Good's death was an inevitable consequence of the broad dragnet and aggressive street-level tactics in rounding up illegal aliens for deportation. I've tried to counter that by pointing out that we had as many, one particular source says even more deportations under Biden than we've had under Trump. Do you remember any of the protest about the deportations under Biden? Of course you didn't. There were virtually none. I've gone all the way back to when Barack Obama was here as president for 8 years, and he was actually taking the time to focus on deportations. Some of the very far left groups called him the deportator of chief deportator or commander of deportation. They use different phrases like that, but the implication is they were upset about his deportations. But again, no protest in the streets. So recognize that some of this has been ginned up for a variety of different reasons. But nevertheless, as Dan McLaughlin points out, with a different set of facts, these critiques might have had some validity. Large-scale deportations require a lot of law enforcement interactions with people who aren't very much willing to be apprehended, some of them violent, others just desperate. This greatly increases the odds of violence, and that is certainly the possibility. So her death wasn't the natural result of the deportation dragnet, he says. She was a citizen, one who hadn't lived in Minneapolis that long, and there's no reason to believe that ICE was investigating her as a possible deportee. There is no sign that ICE was interested in her at all until she inserted herself in the business. Nor was, as he says, her death the result of poor training on the part of current Department of Homeland Security. The agent who fired the shots had reportedly been with ICE for 10 years. And, of course, we do know his name, Jonathan Ross. He was assigned to an elite tactical unit. He was an experienced agent who had a previous experience with vehicle stops, including one last year in which he was dragged by a vehicle. That doesn't place his decisions above criticism, but it does suggest that those decisions were not the result of inexperience, hasty recruitment, or inadequate training. And so the point that you are now starting to see is at least some, and let's give credit where credit is due, very good piece that came out in the New York Post that reported that she was part, quote, of a group of activists who worked to document and resist the federal immigration crackdown in Minnesota. She became involved in what is called ICE Watch, a loose coalition of activists dedicated to disrupting ICE raids in the sanctuary city. Goes on to say coalitions similar to ICE Watch have cropped up all over the country, with activists using phone apps, whistles, and car horns to warn neighborhoods when ICE shows up. ICE Watch and adjacent groups can also turn confrontational, with numerous instances of activists ramming agents with their cars in the past. I think you have to understand that that is not something new. It is actually seems to be a part of, at least for some, a strategy. Also, the New York Post reports that ICE agents have faced an unprecedented spike in car attacks, surging by 3,200% over the last year. This is the shocking data that just came from the Department of Homeland Security. Again, if you want to read this article, it has a very extensive set of paragraphs paragraphs, but in the interest of time, I'll just share with you some of the conclusions. First of all, if you read through that, you're going to see that these are individuals that are dedicated not to just engaging in protest speech, but are engaged in what is called, and this is their phrase, direct action. Now, what does direct action mean? Well, it's a long-standing leftist protest approach, which actually predates the Trump administration. It's been used in the past. In its broadest definition, the term can simply mean staging a fairly passive conflict with a law that you disagree with, and then demonstrating that injustice by provoking arrest or some kind of action. Now, the immediate risk, Dan McLaughlin says, of constant appeals to direct action is it tends to do what? Encourage violence in the protesters. If you tell people to get in their faces of others, to bring a gun to a knife fight, as they say, to give your political opponents no rest at home or at work or even in the motel or hotel where they're staying, then sooner or later these direct personal confrontations are going to take place. And sooner or later, oftentimes sooner, you will trigger in some of your audience a desire to go the next step. Well, there's always a risk in a high-octane political rhetoric. It's a much more vibrant risk when you advocate not just profound emotional animus, but also a tactic of close, personalized confrontation. He concludes by saying, this is how you get the assassinations or assassination attempts or assassination plots against Donald Trump, Charlie Kirk, Brett Kavanaugh and his fellow justices, and the United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, among others. It's how you get senators chased into elevators, as well as senators chased out of restaurants. It's how you get protests outside of Supreme Court justices' homes, how you get speakers shouted off of campuses, and all manner of volatile confrontations. So again, he concludes by saying, this is why the question of the day right now for every Democratic politician and commentator in this country should not be how much they hate ICE and its agents, or whether they want to see federal law nullified by disabling and actually changing enforcement. It should be whether or not they encourage ICE Watch and other similar tactics of creating potentially violent confrontations by protesters, inserting themselves in the face of agents on duty to obstruct the enforcement of the law. Because if they do, Dan McLaughlin says the blood is on their hands, not ICE. So if you wanted to learn a little bit more about ICE Watch, if you wanted to read not only this piece that he's written, but a fairly extensive quote from some of the investigative report that was done by the New York Post, 3 cheers for them today for what they've written. That is one of those that we've posted on the website at pointofview.net. We come back, though, we'll get into the shooting because Byron York takes us through some of the piece-by-piece parts of that as well. But as we take a break, let me just mention again that one of the things we're making available to you today is to actually have a repeal of the FACE Act. This is the FACE Act Repeal Act of 2025. We tell you what the FACE Act is, what the problem is. We give you a suggested letter, which you can modify any way you want. And once you fill out the information and modify it, you can send it to your member of Congress. That's a very important issue. We've made it very easy. Just go to the website, pointofview.net, or respond to the email we just sent out. We'll be right back.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you would like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. We do have a take action item. My Viewpoints commentary today, fraud and taxes, and it's talking a little bit, not just about what fraud was in Minnesota, although that has been the bigger issue, but if you broaden it a little bit, you realize that this is an illustration of a tremendous amount of waste, fraud, and abuse. There was, I think, an attempt by Doge to address some of that and essentially almost got run out of town. By the way, just because Elon Musk is not there doesn't mean they aren't doing some things behind the scenes and have identified some other savings. But it just illustrates that the American people, on the one hand, would love to have a balanced budget, but nobody seemingly wants to give up any of the benefits they receive from the federal government so that we could get a balanced budget. So, of course, we just keep heading down the road, which is why you're going to hear me say some things about economics tomorrow. We've got a couple of very good articles, matter of fact, 3, that I'll probably deal with in the second half of the second hour, just to address some of those issues, to put some of that in perspective. But let's, if we can, take about the other part of that. We talked about the issue of Ice Watch and what precipitated some of that. But this piece by Byron York. Now, you might say, who's Byron York? Well, he's been on the program with us before. He's a really measured, balanced individual with the Washington Examiner. And he says the Minnesota shooting, that settles it, because he's taken the time to do something that I have not, and I suspect most of you don't want to do, and that is to look at not just one video, but all sorts of videos, pull together some pieces, and you may come to a different conclusion. I don't think so if you certainly just want to try to provide some objective look. And nobody believes that what happened should have happened, but it did. And so what do we now know about this? And the first thing he does is quote from Andrew McCarthy, who, by the way, I've quoted rather extensively in a commentary I've got coming out next week. And Andrew McCarthy is oftentimes known for, as a prosecutor, a U.S. attorney, for addressing the issue of Islam. So we're going to be talking about that. But he also, because he's a lawyer, basically has said, quote, and this is Andrew McCarthy saying it, regardless of whether you believe Renee Good's death resulted from either her poor decision-making in gratuitously courting danger or Trump's excessive zeal in ramping up immigration enforcement, the legal case comes down to whether the agent responsibly perceived a potentially lethal threat. And from what we have seen so far, he did. Now, that's Andrew McCarthy, so the rest of what I'm going to be doing is quoting from Byron York. This goes on for 2 pages. I'm not going to spend all the time digging into it. But first of all, Byron York says, first of all, even if you accept that from Andrew McCarthy, and I think that's, again, a reasonable response, that doesn't mean the situation wasn't tragic or that Jonathan Ross, unfortunately, we know his name, so not only is her life over, the simplicity of Jonathan Ross' life probably is over as well, made the best possible decision pulling the trigger. Jonathan Ross is highly unlikely to face any sort of federal prosecution over the incident. And it gives some reasons for that, some legal issues. You can read the paragraph, but I'm going to move on. He says, if nothing else, the video of the shooting, which involved Jonathan Jonathan Ross, of course, and Renee Good, is valuable because for a couple of days after the shooting, Byron York says, it wasn't terribly clear what had happened. Was Good part of the local effort to impede ICE operations? Did her car hit the agent who fired the shots? Did her wife have some sort of role in the events? What had happened in the minutes before the shooting? Nobody knew much. Okay. In some respects, this is why as many videos as possible, even having video cams on police officers, makes sense because we've seen all sorts of claims that have been made over the years. Hands up, don't shoot. That turned out not to be the case. Individuals fired without provocation. That turned out not to be the case. I mean, all the examples we can go through, and the list is pretty long, are resolved when you have a chance to look at not just one video, but many videos. So he goes on and points out that the videos really answer some of the questions. First of all, yes, Good was part of a local effort to impede ICE operations. I just talked about that a minute ago when we talked about ICE Watch, okay? Yes, her car hit Agent Jonathan Ross. Yes, her wife played a role in the events. As far as what happened in the minutes before the shooting, the portion of the video that was released doesn't tell us anything, although another video has recently come to the public attention made from a house overlooking the scene show that Good was obstructing ICE officers. The bottom line is, we've said before, even when we learned about this last week, was sometimes it's better to wait and see what we know rather than jump ahead. And in this polarized situation, people jump in with statements that were not accurate and not helpful. Byron York goes on to say, what was striking was that even as the video emerged, the voices who claimed that the shooting amounted to murder argue that the new pictures supported that position. I'll come back to that comment in just a minute, but let me take two more that he mentions. But the videos left no doubt that this individual, this woman, was impeding ICE. There is no doubt that one or more law enforcement officers ordered her to get out of the car, which she did not do. And so, again, there are all sorts of other arguments he makes here. There's quite a bit of information. I'll let you read it if you'd like. But he concludes by saying, look, even with all of the video, even with all the reasoning here, we still see that, he says, none of this will deter Minnesota's Democratic political officials from denouncing ICE. Perhaps relieved to not be on the defensive about their inaction in the state's massive Somalia fraud scandal, some Democrats in local positions have routinely called Good's death murder. And you have, of course, many of those statements. Let's again recognize that you have the Minneapolis mayor, Jacob Fry, saying, get the out of Minneapolis. All of this is, again, uses words we won't use. You have, of course, not just the people in Minnesota, but let's take the mayor of New York City. This morning, an ICE agent murdered a woman in Minneapolis, only the latest horror in a year full of cruelty. Again, the word murder has a meaning, doesn't it? And this is the problem when we have people making up meanings for words. A murder means premeditation. I mean, the definition of murder you can even find in the Old Testament. It's called lying in wait. It's premeditation. Did he know who she was? Did he plan ahead of time to kill this woman? No, that is not murder. It has led to, let me take this one from the Los Angeles Times, for example. Gustavo Arellano says, citizens are finally getting it. No one's safe from Trump's deportation ambitions. No one's safe. Just think of the hyperbole there. Are you unsafe because of the deportations? Are individuals who are not here illegally safe? I think we are safe. Individuals even that are here illegally that are not criminals probably are safe from deportations, but that is the case. And of course, here's another one. A congresswoman wants to impeach Kristi Noem. She's the Secretary of Homeland Security, and she's right to do so. This is an article from John Wiener Mueller. So you have, at a time when maybe a little bit of common sense, a little more measured conversation from, say, Byron York should be what we would hear as the type of very careful evaluation of a very tragic situation. But instead of trying to maybe tamp down and calm down some of the rhetoric and some of the charges and countercharges, you have the governor of Minnesota, and you have the mayor of Minneapolis, you have the governor of Oregon, and you have the mayor of Portland. On the other hand, you have some of the statements made by Donald Trump or other people in the administration, and you have the mayor of New York City referring to it as a murder. You have a well-known columnist for the Los Angeles Times arguing that nobody is safe because of these deportations. And then you have, of course, members of Congress that not only, of course, want to impeach Donald Trump and impeach the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, but they also want to impeach Kristi Noem, who is the Director of Homeland Security. That is the kind of world that we find ourselves in, but I'm hoping that we can provide just a little bit more calm, a little bit more measured evaluation. Hence, the reason I've posted this third article by somebody we think highly of, Byron York, who takes you the time through some of the very important facts that we've learned from some of those videos. It's on the website at pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Fourth and fifth articles we've provided for you today. Fourth article is one that we'll come back to later in the week, but I thought I'd just mention that tomorrow the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments which come out of two different states having to do with the fundamental question we've talked about before here on Point of View. Do biological boys who transition into being girls have a constitutional right to compete with girls? Now, again, 27 states have laws or some kind of policy forbidding that, but you've had two appellate courts say that those laws are wrong and unconstitutional. So tomorrow, the justices will hear appeals from Idaho and West Virginia. A lot of them all relate to what's called Little versus Hecox, which is an adult biological male who is now claiming to be a female and has female attributes, Lindsay Hecox, who sought to compete in women's track and cross country at Boise State University. You also have one out of West Virginia versus BPJ. That's a teenager BPJ. That's, well, all we know, a track and country athlete. And both of these states, both Idaho as well as West Virginia, have barred biological males from participating in women's teams. Now, it's interesting because I have been familiar with the fact that in Idaho for a while that had actually been vetoed. I guess I take that back. It had actually been signed by the governor, and then a judge, and I think even the ACLU challenged that. But nevertheless, whether you look at the Lindsay Hecox or BPJ, in some cases you're talking about one is an adult, the other is a teenager who has been taking estrogen at the end of sixth grade and has participated in some of the non-contact sports like running cross country, doing shot put, discus, and whatever. And so the argument is being made right now is that the law out of Idaho in particular, which is going to be front and center, sweeps too broadly and actually does not allow individuals who are transgender to compete with cisgender women and girls. You got the point? And so a lot of this has to do with whether or not this fits under the issue of equal protection, because equal protection means treating people alike. West Virginia says its law complies and addresses the specific concern about male advantage over female competitors. And of course, when you get to West Virginia, the argument there is that the plaintiffs are claiming that Title IX in the 1972 law against sex discrimination, that is a problem. And so as a result, they cite the Supreme Court decision of Bostock, which is 2020, having to do with homosexuality, by the way, on the whole issue of sex, which has now been changed to the issue of transgender. So this gets us into some of the wokeism we've talked about here before, here on Point of View. And so we'll be following that. And after the oral arguments, we'll probably talk about it again and see where the Supreme Court rules. But right at the moment, you have two different appellate courts that have said it is not constitutional to prohibit a transgender female, that'd be a boy or a man who now claims to be a girl or a woman, from participating in women's sports. So we will see where that one goes. I have a suggestion as to what might happen, but since we have some of our lawyers with us on Friday, I can't wait to hear Jeff Mateer and Aaron Smith talk about that case. So we'll acknowledge that it is going to be discussed and oral arguments will be presented tomorrow, and then we'll come back to it on Friday to pick up those pieces. Just before we wind down, though, one of the things we have been following, and I hope you've appreciated our December issue of Outlook, which dealt with revival. This is a very good piece that came from Christian Post. Is the church really seeing a revival in attendance among Gen Z? And I need to know how to say his Enragra, I think is his name, Kumar, is the author. And he basically says that church attendance among Gen Z has shown some signs of stabilizing after years of generational decline, with some indications pointing to even a modest religious rebound. But there's really no evidence of what some people have called a religious resurgence, which is underway. So, good news, but not great news. Let's not overplay what we know. They point out that if you look at the various Pew studies, which have come out, almost two-thirds, 62% of U.S. adults identify as Christian, 28% have no religious affiliation, the so-called nuns, and then 8% belong to other religions. These figures, quite frankly, have remained pretty much unchanged since 2020. So we are talking about nothing that has changed that much. Monthly religious service attendance now stands at about 34% of U.S. adults, which is pretty consistent with what we've seen over these last many years. Among Gen Z, those born, for example, between 2003 and 2007, report higher levels of religious engagement than their slightly older peers born between 1995 and 2002. So we do see a little bit of an uptick with maybe the trailing edge of what you might call Gen Z. The larger context, he says, remains complex. Younger adults continue to lag behind older generations in nearly every major measure of religious commitment. Belief in God, daily prayer, the role of religion in daily life. Only about 57% of adults under 30 identify with a religion, compared to over 80% of Americans age 60 and above. So that is, I think, something that we have to pay attention to. And he also goes on to point out that historical patterns advise some caution. Sometimes you see an uptick, but over time it drops. And so that is certainly something to pay attention to. But he says at the same time, fewer young adults identify as nominal or cultural Christians. Those who remain affiliated tend to attend church more consistently and report stronger personal conviction, suggesting a more committed base despite smaller numbers. That, I think, fits with what we've seen before. If you go to sometimes what I call the corners of the country, the New England, Northeast, or even the Northwest, there where it isn't really, quote, fashionable to be a Christian, the people who tend to go to church tend to be even more committed. Whereas maybe in the Midwest and the South, where, everybody's, quote, a Christian, you have a lot more of people that might attend church, but they're really sort of nominal Christians, or what we call cultural Christians. So again, we see the same kind of idea that maybe the numbers may be smaller, but the commitment may be a little bit greater. So if nothing else, a very good piece to warn us to make sure we don't overplay some of the encouraging signs, of which there are many. The number of individuals buying Bibles, the number of people subscribing to Christian media and things of that nature, all of which we are showing some encouraging signs among Gen Z. But we'll be careful to analyze the data because we don't want to overplay some of the things that we see happening before us. It's one of those trends we're going to be watching, and you'll be hearing about us talking about that quite often in the future. If you're interested, the December issue of Outlook goes into it in great detail. If you're not a monthly supporter and would like to get a copy, well, let us know, and we'll send you a copy of the December issue. It would, if nothing else, hopefully encourage you to be a monthly supporter so you receive that every single month. Most importantly, I want to thank Megan for her help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. Looking forward to our great conversation tomorrow right here on Point of View.
The Bible tells us not to worry, and yet there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes even knowing what to pray can be difficult, and that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week, you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.